Chapter 1. In a palm tree, on an island, in the middle of the wide blue sea, was a girl. Nim's hair was wild, her eyes were bright and round, her neck she wore 3 cords. One was a spyglass, one for a whirly, whistling shell, and the other a fat red pocket knife in a sheath. With the spyglass at her eye, she watched her father's boat. It sailed out through the reef to the deeper, darker ocean, and Jack turned to wave, and Nim waved back, though she knew he couldn't see her. Then the white sails caught the wind and blew him out of sight, and Nim was alone. For 3 days and 3 nights, whatever happened or needed doing, Nim would do it. "And what we need first," said Nim, "is breakfast." So she threw 4 ripe coconuts, thump, into the sand and climbed down after them. Then she whistled her shell, 2 long, shrill notes that carried far out to the reef where the sea lions were fishing. Selkie popped her head above the water. She had a fish in her mouth, but she swallowed it fast and dived towards the beach. And from a rock by the hut, Fred came scuttling. Fred was an iguana, spiky as a dragon, with a cheerful snub nose. He twined round Nim's feet in a prickly hug. "Are you saying good morning?" Nim demanded, "or just begging for breakfast?" Fred stared at the coconuts. He was a very honest iguana. Coconuts are tricky to open, but Nim was an expert. With a rock and a spike, she punched a hole and drank the juice, cracked the shell and prized out the flesh. Fred snatched his piece and gulped it down. Marine iguanas don't eat coconuts, but no one had ever told Fred. Now Selkie was flopping on the beach to greet them. "But we'll come in too," Nim shouted, and dived off the rocks. Selkie twisted and shot up underneath, gliding Nim through the waves, thumping over, ducking under. Nim clung tight till she was half sea lion, half girl, and all of her was part ocean. Then Selkie and Fred went to sunbake on the rock, and Nim went back to the hut. She poured a mug of water from her favourite blue bottle, brushed her teeth above a clump of grass that needed the spit, and started her chores. There were lots today, because she was doing some of Jack's as well as her own. Long ago, when Nim was a baby, she'd had a mother as well as Jack. But one day, her mother had gone to investigate the contents of a blue whale's stomach. It was an interesting experiment that no one had done for thousands of years, and Jack said it would have been all right. It should have been safe. Until the Tropo tourists came to make a film of it, shouting and racing their huge pink and purple boats around Nim's mother and the whale. When Jack told them to stop, they made rude signs and bumped their boats against the whale's nose. The whale panicked and dived so deep that no one ever knew where or when he came back up again. Nim's mother never came back up at all. So Jack packed his baby into his boat and sailed round and round the world, just in case Nim's mother came back up out of the ocean somewhere and didn't know where to find them. Then, one day, when the baby had grown into a very little girl, he'd found this island. It was the most beautiful island in the whole world. It had white shell beaches, pale gold sands, and tumbled black rocks where the spray threw rainbows into the sky. It had a fiery mountain with green rainforests on the high slopes and grasslands at the bottom. There was a pool of fresh water to drink, a waterfall to slide down. In a hidden hollow where the grasslands met the white shell beach, there was a place for a hut. And around it all, so that only the smallest boats could weave their way through, was a maze of reefs, curving from the black rocks on one side to the white cliffs on the other. Jack sailed back to his city for the very last time. He filled up the boat with plants for a garden and supplies for science, and landed on the island to build a home for just him and his daughter, because he knew now that Nim's mother had stayed down at the bottom of the sea. Like a mermaid, Nim thought. He built a hut of driftwood logs and good strong branches, with a palm-thatched roof and a hard dirt floor. He put up a satellite dish and a solar panel to charge the batteries for the torch, a mobile phone and a laptop computer. He made sleeping mats stuffed with rustling palm fronds, a table and 2 stools, a desk, a bookcase and shelves for his science stuff, coconut shell bowls and seashell plates. He dug a vegetable garden in the rich soil at Fire Mountain's base and planted avocados, bananas, lettuces, oranges, pineapple, strawberries, sweet potatoes and tomatoes and bamboo for making pipes and useful things. Then he went on being a scientist, and when Nim got older, she helped him. They read what the barometer said, measured how much rain fell every day, how strong the winds were, how high the high tides reached and how low the low tides fell, and then they marked the measurements on a clean white chart with a dark blue felt-tip pen. They studied the plants that grew on the island and the animals that lived there. They put blue bands on the birds' legs and wrote down the numbers so that Jack could remember the birds' birthday and who their mother and father were. Nim remembered anyway. Sometimes Jack wrote articles about the weather and the plants and animals and emailed them to science magazines and universities, and sometimes people emailed him questions to answer. He would tell them about tropical storms and iguanas and seaweed, but he would never tell them where the island was, in case the tropo-tourists ever found it, because Jack hated the tropo-tourists, who worse than sea snakes or scorpions. Only the supply ships which came once a year to bring them books and paper, flour and yeast, nails and cloth, and the other things they couldn't make themselves, knew where they lived. It was too big to weave its way through the reef, so Jack and Nim always sailed out to meet it, and the ship's captain never saw just how beautiful the island was. And every day, no matter how excited Jack got about finding a new kind of seashell or butterfly, they looked after their garden, they watered it, if it was dry, weeded the weeds and picked what was ripe. Jack built a 3-sided shed for the tools with a hook for the bananas and his big machete to cut them. The machete was Nim's favourite tool. When they'd looked after the garden and fished for dinner and checked the beaches for driftwood or bottles or anything else that might have floated in on the tide, Nim had school. That was what they called it, but it wasn't inside, and it wasn't at a desk. They sat on the beach in the dark to study the stars and climb cliffs to see the birds in the nest. Nim learned the languages of the dolphins about the tiny crabs that float out to sea on their coconut homes, and how to watch the clouds and listen to the wind. Sometimes for a whole day they talked in sea lion grunts, or frigate bird squawks, or plankton wiggles. Jack loved plankton. Nim's favourite were the ones that shone bright in the sea at night, but Jack loved them all, because they were so little and so important, because little fish ate them, and bigger fish ate the little fish, and the biggest fish ate the bigger fish, and there wouldn't have been any fish at all if it wasn't for the plankton. But Nim liked animals that you could see and have fun with, so when Jack had said he was going sailing for 3 days to collect plankton, Nim had decided to stay home. "I'll phone every night at sunset," said Jack, "and then you can check the email. If you don't hear from me or see me for 3 days, send an SOS. But Nim knew Jack would be okay, because he was the best sailor on the ocean, and Jack knew that Nim would be okay, because Selkie was always with her, and Selkie sometimes forgot that Nim was strong and smart, and looked after her as if she was a tiny pup. Even when the king of the sea lions barked at her to come and fish or snuggle at night with her sea lion family, Selkie stayed close to Nim. Chapter 2. All that first day alone, Nim did the things that she did when Jack was home. Sometimes she even forgot that he wasn't just somewhere else on the island, measuring the bubbles at the hissing stones or counting eggs in the kittiwake's nest. But when she went to bed, the wind began to blow. It had been the tiniest breeze as she sat on the beach to watch the sun go down and wait for the phone to ring, the barest stirring of the palms as Jack said hello. "Did you find interesting plankton?" she asked. "Millions," said Jack, "trillions, and some greedy birds who thought I was fishing." "Far-away birds?" "Home birds. The big one you call Galileo swooped me in case my microscope was a fish. I told him to go home and bother you." Nim laughed. "He did. I only caught one fish all afternoon, and he snitched it right out of my hands, so I gave up and read on Selkie's Rock." "Good book?" "Mountain Madness. You said it was your very favourite, remember?" "So I did," said Jack. "Because it's exciting?" "I liked the people in it," said Jack. "I felt as if the hero could be my friend. It would be funny having a friend that could talk. "Honk, swaffle, grunt," said Jack, in his best sea lion voice. "Selkie can talk. She's just not very good at telling stories." Nim patted Selkie in case that hurt her feelings. Don't forget to check the email, Jack went on. Say I'll answer in a few days, unless it's the Tropotaurus. I'd rather meet 6 hungry sharks than that pink and purple boat. I'd rather meet a cyclone at sea. I'd rather jump in the fire from the fire mountain, or talk to Nim when she hasn't had enough sleep, said Jack. Don't stay up too late reading. So Nim blew iguana kisses into the phone and went back to the hut, and the breeze flicked her hair and was cool against her cheek. It was already dark in the hut, and when she checked the email, even though she didn't know anyone in the wide world who might send her a letter, it made her lonely to see no messages in the email box on the screen. Good night, Selkie, Nim called. Good night, Fred. Fred was already asleep in his little rock cave beside the hut, and there was a quiet honk from Selkie's rock. Nim lay down on her mat with her torch and her book. The waves rumbled onto the reef and mumbled across the sand. The breeze whistled through the cracks in the walls, and there was no comforting noise of Jack humming to himself or turning pages. Nim felt excited and brave and a tiny bit afraid, but the second chapter of Mountain Madness was even more exciting than the first, and she thought about the hero till she went to sleep. The wind grew stronger. It howled at the door and screamed through the windows. It laughed at Nim because Jack wasn't there. She didn't know if it was just teasing her or was going to grow to a tree-throwing, heart-smashing storm. She switched on the torch and crept outside. The clouds were scudding across the moon. The stars had disappeared and there was a lashing of rain. Nim stumbled and nearly dropped her torch, but she could see Selkie's shape darker than the night and heard her bark deeper than the wind. Selkie nuzzled Nim's shoulder and curled tight around her. The wind passed, the tail of the storm roaring out to sea, and Nim was snug in her sea-lion shelter, breathing the warm smell of fur. Next morning, coconuts were scattered over the beach, and the hut had a dent in the roof, but the solar panels were safe, and the satellite dish sitting above the hut like a fat white coconut was still waiting for a message to bounce across the world and into Jack's email. Inside the hut was gritty with sand. Mountain Madness had blown open, and a piece of newspaper Jack had used as a bookmark was stuck against a wall. Nim tucked it back inside the cover and started cleaning the hut. She shook her sleeping mat outside the door, swept out the sand, and used a scrap of old t-shirt to dust the laptop, and Jack's science stuff, her polished driftwood, a threaded wreath of shells, and the picture of her mother. Her mother had bright, clever eyes and a wide, funny smile. She looked happy, excited, because it was the morning. She went diving to investigate the contents of the blue whale's stomach. Nim put the photo back on the shelf. She put her empty water bottles into her wagon and whistled for Fred. Fred liked going wherever Nim went, especially places where Selkie couldn't follow. He curled spikily around her neck, and they towed the wagon across the grass and up to the tangled vines and ferns of the rainforest. At the edge of the rainforest was a wide rock pool, with a waterfall tumbling into it, and on the other side of the pool was a garden. There were plants to prop up that had toppled over in the wind, weeds to pull and strawberries to nibble, and a huge bunch of bananas just green enough to pick. Nim liked bananas, but what she liked even better was swinging Jack's machete. It was shiny and sharp and made her feel like a pirate. "Arg, my hearties!" she shouted and chopped down the bunch. She dragged them to the shed and hooked them to a rope looping over a beam in the roof. "I'm swinging the bananas!" and she grabbed the rope just above her head. Fred jumped and clung to the end with his claws. Swinging hard and heavy, she hoisted the bananas up to the roof to ripen. It would have been easier if Selkie had helped, but sea lions aren't much good at swinging on ropes. Nim put the machete away. "Are you hot?" Fred knew what she was thinking. He raced her up the path to the top of the waterfall. Over thousands of years, the water trickling down the mountain had worn away the steep black rocks to make a curving slide. It was perfect for whooshing a girl and an iguana over bumps and dips, splashing them into the pool at the bottom. Nim and Fred ran up and slid down until it was time for lunch. Then Nim picked up a tomato and an avocado that had fallen off in the wind and weeded quickly around the peas. "They'll be ready tomorrow," she told Fred. But Fred didn't like peas, and he was getting bored. He started chewing leaves and spitting them out. I won't bring you up to the garden again, Nim said sternly. Fred spat out the last bit of pea leaf and crawled into the wagon for a wild ride down the hill. That night she sat on the rocks with the phone and watched the sun sink red into the water. Jack didn't call. She pressed his number, but his phone didn't ring, and he didn't answer. She checked the email, and there was nothing there either. Nightmare pictures sneaked into Nim's head, upside-down boats, sinking boats, boats sailing off into the distance with fallen-off people swimming behind. She pushed the scenes away angrily. Jack was busy. He was concentrating on his plankton and didn't know what time it was, like when he was doing science things at home and forgot to eat. She picked up her book, and soon she wasn't Nim anymore. She was a strong, brave hero scrambling up a cliff. She was swinging across a chasm, reaching for the other side, and rubbing her aching eyes, looking up to see that the hut was dark and her torch beam was fading into the night. But she stayed being a hero until she went to sleep, because tonight she liked it better than being Nim.